Hello, trauma thrivers. Welcome to another week. And I'm delighted to be joined, of course, by Mel. But tonight we're joined by Victoria and Liz. And I don't know who wants to go first in introducing themselves. Victoria, shall we let you say a little bit about who you are and why you're with us tonight, thankfully?
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this exciting conversation about this very important topic. So I am Victoria Seed and I help families who are affected by a loved one's problem drinking or drug use. I've done this work for a long time, and I started off this work really as a result of getting expelled from school when I was 15 years old. Ended for a very silly mistake, and I realised before that even that I wanted to work with children and families, and that's where my career started. So I am a substance misuse practitioner. I've worked in prisons, NHS, third sector organisations, and I have a service now called the Vesta Approach as well. So thank you.
Brilliant. Well, lovely to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us. Really great of you. And Liz, you're back. You decided to come back for a second go.
Thanks for letting me have a second go.
The first was so brilliant. How could we not?
You're too kind. Thank you very much. My name's Liz Martin. Lovely to be with all three of you, and especially Victoria as well, who I've never met before until now. I'm a psychotherapist and EFT practitioner, fairly newly qualified as an EFT practitioner. And I have been working in the field of addiction, etc. since 2004. So I specialise in addiction, including alcoholism, childhood trauma, codependency, eating disorders, and work with not only individuals but family members as well, which is why it's really a fantastic subject this evening. And I've worked across all modalities as well. It was really interesting when you said, Victoria, in prisons. I worked for many years in prisons as well. Worked in and also in the private sector as well. And I'm in private practice now and have been for about 12 years. So just delighted to be here again.
Amazing for you to be here, because obviously we met, didn't we, in 2004, was it?
It may have been, but I know we started working together properly in 2010.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yep.
It feels like it was 2004, and I say that with all respect, saying feels like I've known you longer than 11 years. But
yeah, absolutely.
We worked a lot, didn't we, on the addiction treatment program at the Priory Hospital in Roehampton together.
We did, and I worked on the family program as well as the addiction treatment program.
You did. And that's why we're here tonight, all four of us, to talk about families and addiction. And Mel, I know that you did a great video earlier and said a little bit about this month. And I wonder, for those people that don't know what this month is, whether you might be able to share with us why we're doing this in this month.
Absolutely. Hello everyone, so lovely to be here again with you all. So this is and you're apparently supposed to use that, say hashtag recovery month.
I heard you say that earlier. I thought
to use the hashtag when they talk about it. So it is recovery month, and September is a month that has been dedicated to celebrating the wins and the gains of people that are in recovery. And it's also a month where the people that have kind of coined this this month as Recovery Month, the organisation that have done that, that they kind of get quite busy in sharing kind of new evidence-based treatments, what's going on within the world of recovery. So it really is about raising awareness, destigmatizing and celebrating people that are in recovery. So it's really lovely. It's a really great thing to do, you know, the same way that we do with with any kind of, you know, every sort of, I know that there's debate about whether addiction is an illness or not, so I'm not getting into that debate, but you know, we have lots of you know, awareness days for illnesses or for mental health or that sort of thing. And I just think it's really lovely that we can celebrate and raise awareness of recovery in the same way that we do anything else.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's Recovery Month on addiction, but I know that we often talk about, and I suppose I'm starting with this point, about what is recovery from addiction, and is it recovery from addiction, or is it recovery from trauma, you know, and the link between trauma and addiction. And I wonder whether we could just start off maybe with our professional experiences on how those two are interlinked, and then maybe move into our personal experiences afterwards. Liz, do you want to go first on this one?
Yes. So in terms of addiction and trauma, and is there a link? My professional experience is that of all the clients that I've worked with, you know, that have addiction issues, I've yet to come across a client that doesn't have some form of trauma in their history. And that's the truth. That's not to say that everyone that suffered trauma becomes an addict, and I don't mean that at all, but certainly everybody that I have dealt with, you know, over the years, and they most definitely have trauma when you start to sort of, you know, look into that and explore that. And so that's most definitely, that's been my experience anyway. And I think with addiction, if there is issues around a substance or behaviour, you have to, for me anyway, that has to be stabilized, there has to be neutral, there has to be no more acting out around that in order to then deal with the trauma that's always going to be there. And that trauma can act as a trigger into addictive behaviour, be it a substance or behaviour, because it's just about numbing those feelings that are too overwhelming or too painful. So yeah, that's my take professionally.
Okay, cool. Victoria, where are you at with that?
Yeah, I agree with Liz. You know, I like I say, I started off my career working with offenders. So I was working with juvenile, what do we call them then? Learners. I was teaching at the time when I was 23. And then I moved over to the substance misuse team because the Youth Justice Board back then put a lot of money into prisons. And I was luckily part of building a new service in the young offenders institution I was in. And you saw the young people coming in and out. The recidivism rate was about 70%. So they were going out and coming back in 70% of the time. And I once I started doing the substance misuse work back in 2005, I could see the trauma, I could see the intergenerational substance use, I could see that, you know, we were only touching the surface. You'd get young people coming in that were in for 4 months, they used to say 4 do 2, so they were getting 4-month sentences and serving 2. So in that time, really, the work was around harm minimisation. It was around, right, well, you know, if you're going to go out and smoke weed and snort lines of cocaine and what have you, you've got to do it in the safest way possible to prevent you being bloodborne viruses and things. But I saw that then, and what I realised then was that in order for us to really make a difference as professionals with people, we had to work with the whole family. And when I started doing that in my next role, so I worked with children of alcoholics and then whole family support in an award-winning service, and I was again fortunate enough to set that up in a service. I realised that doing that was really, really making a difference to the families, because we weren't just treating an individual, we were treating the children and we were treating the affected family members as well. And the best thing we did when I went back to that service on a consultancy project was introduce adverse childhood experiences routine inquiry. So we were working with parents, and they were, really poorly people in some cases, but nobody was asking them what had happened to them. So like Liz said, you kind of go into, right, let's problem solve, let's get you stable from your substances, and that's what we were all trained to do, weren't we? Let's head for abstinence, let's focus on that. But we weren't like asking the other questions, were we? So interestingly, like when we started asking that, and it was tough because it was tough for professionals, where I'm a practitioner, I'm not a therapist. So my job is a bit before, that Liz was just saying, is kind of doing the bit before you do in your roles, because I get them stabilised. I'm a drug and alcohol practitioner. I will work with individuals and families to get them from chaos to calm, and then once that trauma comes to the surface, and I'm like, okay, go and get some help from Lou and Melanie and Liz, because that's going to really work with that at depth. And the ACEs routine inquiry really helped us and the people to see why they were using the substances. And so many of those parents said to us, I am so glad you've helped me realise this, because nobody has ever asked me.
I think you're so spot on. And for anybody listening or watching this, ACEs, an adverse childhood experience scale, you can actually Google. And, there is some negative press around it, but from what I have discovered for myself, and I think Mel agrees, is that it can be a real light bulb moment for people of kind of coming out of that addiction. I'm an addict, there's kind of something wrong with me, and pathologizing that we do really badly sometimes, or some people do, to what happened to you. And the ACEs help bridge that, don't they? Because you can look at events and things that have gone on in your life and your neurophysiology and go, oh, well, actually, maybe there isn't something really that wrong with me. It's actually what's happened to me that's had the effect.
Exactly what I was going to say. I'm so sorry to cut in there, but that for me, just I almost feel quite emotional when I think about that. Is when you see somebody that's in active addiction that's causing themselves so much harm. I want to inquire what's happened. What's happened? What happened to you? Not, judging them or anything, but what happened to you?
Mel, where are you with it all?
Well, my take on it professionally and personally, but what I know we're talking professionally at the moment, is that, addiction is a symptom of trauma. Addiction is a manifestation of the pain that we hold inside of us as the result of trauma. It is a maladaptive coping mechanism that people turn to as a way of numbing, avoiding, and coping with reality, with a reality that is too painful. I also, Victoria, through doing some intervention work, I'm a trained interventionist as well, sometimes am in at the beginning of that process. And, what happens a lot of the time is you go into the family, and as soon as you're in the family, you can see why you have this addicted person. Instantly you see the family dynamic, you see where the trauma is coming from. And this isn't about me saying, your family is effed up, or, you're all a load of rubbish or anything like that. But this is really about being able to take that professional bird's eye view of the situation, where you can say exactly, Liz, what you were just saying. This is what's happened to you. No wonder you have had to turn to something to avoid, to numb, to escape. And you see those dynamics at play in front of you, like Victoria, you were saying, when you're in there kind of at the beginning of it. So yeah, professionally, that's where I come from. And I come very much from the point of view that, addiction is recovery into addiction needs to be done with love and compassion, and an understanding of what is happening for that person internally.
Yeah. And what's happening, thanks Mel, within the system too, because I love the words from chaos to calm that you use, Victoria, which is, you know, if we've been in an intergenerational or a family system where, you know, somebody has been acting out or has been in chaos or dysregulated, which trauma survivors often are, and so are addicts, there is no calm, is there? It is all dysregulated. And actually what we all need, whether we've got trauma or addictions, is a form of re-regulating and coming into our bodies and our nervous systems. And I'm guessing that none of us came to this work or with our own, and I'm not sure about you, Victoria, but our own addictive processes and our own trauma without a slightly chaotic or sometimes dysfunctional background in some way. So I just wonder whether it might be an opportune moment to bring in some of our personal stories of addiction and trauma and the family. And Victoria, what was your experience within your own family system?
Within my own family, I'm careful to discuss this really because they're kind of still around, but and with as much respect as possible. I was brought up in a family that was pretty working class, and there was like a work hard, play hard mentality really. So I was brought up with a lot of alcohol around me. It was really normalised. You know, I was allowed to go out and drink when I was 13, and I did. I was clubbing when I was 14, you know, and but I was really naive. Hence the reason why I was excluded from school for buying acid on the school field, which, might I add, was the first time I had ever been involved in any substances in my life, and everyone was doing it, so I just did it. You know, I was stupid. But going through that process myself, where I was penalised, where I was, well, I could have been criminalised. Thankfully, I wasn't. You know, it was pretty traumatic, and it's only really in recent years that I've gone back to that and thought that's driven me to do this work subconsciously, because I thought it was separate and it wasn't. But like I say, I always wanted to work with children and families, and part of the reason for that is because there was chaos in my family. You know, it was an angry household. I don't have a relationship with my mum anymore. She's narcissistic. I had to cut off from her 8 years ago when my daughter was born. So you know, all of that drives me to do this work, but I've got to be careful myself as well when I'm working with my clients, you know, where you get that client that might remind me of my mum and things like that. But yeah, that really piqued my interest in doing the work I do. And I have got family members one of whom has had an alcohol issue, and one who currently has a drug issue. Right. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and you know, it's not surprising, is it? There's 1 in 5 children affected by somebody else's problem drug or alcohol use, and 1 in 10 adults.
I would have thought it was higher than that, actually, than 1 in 5. Funnily enough, I think that figure's quite low.
Yeah, that came from NACOA, you know, the National Association for the Children of Alcoholics. So it is alcohol based. So if we brought drugs into it as well, it'd be probably more. But and that isn't, and you'll notice my use of language there, it's not necessarily addiction, that's problem drug and alcohol use, because I think a lot of people don't associate with that word addict or addiction, especially families when there's denial, or individuals when there's denial. So there's a lot of problems that can be caused, can't there, around drugs and alcohol that might not even reach what we would perceive addiction to be.
Yeah. And even, you know, maybe other dependencies that aren't just drugs and alcohol too, but that might numb us out or zone us out or make us unavailable as parents, or not really present for our children, if that makes sense. You know, there are other things too, aren't there, that disconnect us from ourselves, and therefore if we're disconnected from ourselves, we can't really connect and be that regulator. But Liz.
Okay, so what was the question again? I'm laughing.
Well, just about your own family experience, really, about, you know, how it affected you. And I know, you know, this is not a blame and a shame session, is it? This is just
not at all.
Honestly of, you know, how it is, and
absolutely,
how it affected us, really.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and it's safe to say, just before I sort of give a very brief where I've come from, for me anyway, it's a sort of a bit of a lifetime's journey, sort of uncovering more and more. You know, the more time goes on, the more work I do in myself, the more I discover, and I think, oh wow. And you know, my family history, alcoholism in the family, a lot of negativity, violence, abuse, and just you know, growing up. And I what Victoria was saying, you sort of need to be slightly careful what I say, obviously, because some of my family are still around. Mind you, I don't think that I'm a member of this group, so we'll be fine. And again, it's not blame, it's just, you know, bless them. You know, I had my caregivers were very damaged individuals, you know, who also came from very violent alcoholic backgrounds. There was, you know, abuse there was all sorts of stuff, and it was just, you know, so you know, I couldn't be or do or turn out to be anything other than what I was, because of the environment that I grew up in, really. And and you know, like Victoria was saying, you know, I turned to in fact, one of the first things I turned to was food. You know, I was only 11 at the time. Then 13, it was alcohol, 13, 14. And then, you know, swore I'd never used drugs, but then did use drugs when I was like 32. And, you know, and throughout that time as well, my choices were not necessarily the most helpful. Even when it came to the person I decided I was going to marry. You know, I have adult children now. Bringing them into an environment, again, you know, I was in active alcoholism and addiction, as was their father, and he still is. You know, I'm in recovery now, but, you know, bringing my kids up in that environment, and then we split up when they were really young, and, you know, talking about that sort of generational thing, you know, I've passed on things to my kids. You know, and my kids are adults, all addicts. One, thank goodness, is in, you know, recovery. Two of them have been caught up in the criminal justice system a lot. You know, so there's all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And and I think for me, and it's just personally, the more I learn, there's almost a bit of me that thinks, oh, geez, I wish I didn't know that. I have to be honest, because it's like, oh shit, you know. And you know, and this ongoing work is coming to terms with, okay, that's what I did, that's what I was then. I was doing my best. I was very, very unwell, really, really unwell. And you know, it's the main thing I can do is just continue to keep working on me and amending that and making sure that, you know, what I'm putting out to the universe today, without sounding too hippie, is the right thing. You know, there's much more. I mean, my, you know, their parental side of my kids, you know, they're Jewish immigrants, so you can imagine the generational trauma that's there without even, you know, I mean, just horrific, you know. And then my side of the family are sort of, you know, Irish potato famine. It's, so, you know, so
there's a lot going on. Yeah. And
so
what I love is that, you know, you've consistently done the work on yourself, Liz, ever since I've known you, and, you know, way before that too. And what I want to say to anybody listening who is still maybe in their active addiction or in trying to get into recovery, or it's never too late to do the work.
Never.
You know, and everything that we learn and everything that we grow and develop, you can become that transitional character then of the family who doesn't pass it down or starts to change the trauma timeline generationally.
Absolutely. Just quickly, you know, I know me being in recovery for, gosh, it's coming up for 25 years.
Wow.
Exactly why one of my kids has actually got into recovery. And they all know about it, you know, and another one is in and out. He's sort of, you know, sorry, I shouldn't say what sex they are. Thankfully, they've not got the same surname as me, so nobody has any idea who they are. But,
Yeah.
you know, but again, there is that knock-on effect.
Yeah.
I don't need to ram it down their throat, but they see an example of potentially, and all that recovery, well, I say all that recovery is given, that, you know, what it does is that it gives you an opportunity to become the person that you actually are.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. Thank you.
That's all.
Mel?
Probably overshared there, sorry.
Not at all, Liz, not at all.
No, I agree.
So I think I have been on both sides of being the impacted and the impactor of addiction within families. And I would say that, you know, my childhood I wasn't brought up in a household where there was, you know, alcoholism or addiction in the kind of conventional sense that we let's talk about it in, but there was probably certainly other ways. So, you know, when I talk about families in addiction and families in recovery, I talk very much from the point of view of the person that was addicted and the person that brought the impact of their addiction into the family system. You know, my addiction was horrendous. You know, it took me to the streets. You know, I ended up homeless in my addiction. And, you know, I was that, and I refer to myself as an addict because I'm comfortable doing that. But, you know, I was the addict that, you know, would turn up in police cars in blackouts at my mum's door, who had to have the police call because I was missing, you know, all of those things. And, you know, what I saw was the people that loved me the most, that cared about me the most, in so much pain. And yet, you know, this is how I understand, you know, recovery. Addiction is so difficult to get out of, because even when I saw the pain that my addiction was causing, I still couldn't stop. You know, and that for me was something that it took me a really long time to get my head around. And one of the things that I really want to say here, and you'll notice that I corrected myself a little bit there, is because, you know, I always try, and when I refer to the pain that was brought to my family and the harm that was brought to my family through my addiction, I'm very careful not to use the word I, because it wasn't me, it was my addiction. And I think that it's, when I work with clients, I make sure that they understand that there is a difference between their authentic selves and their addict selves, because it's really easy to come into recovery and be left with the shame and the guilt and the remorse. And coming into recovery is about taking ownership and accountability and responsibility for things that happened. But recovery is also about relinquishing shame and breaking stigma. And one of the things that, you know, is really important to me to get across is that it wasn't me, it was the pain within me that was causing that behavior. I relinquish that shame when I talk in that way. So, but yes, I come very much from the side of seeing the impact that my addiction had on those that loved me the most.
Thank you for that. And I agree with you. I think it's always about parts, isn't it? And the part of us, the I, the identity is much bigger than the addiction. The addictive part is an aspect, but it's a kind of part that is running away or flighting from what the internal battle is and what's going on, really, isn't it? So
Sorry,
and
Liz, one of the things I really wanted to say here as well was that I was sort of trying to get recovery for a long time, probably for about 15 years before I actually got any kind of length of recovery behind me. And actually, my mum's recovery started before mine did. And this is why I'm very passionate about working with the family system, is because quite often recovery starts with the person that isn't addicted before it goes. It can happen that way. And I think that's a message that I really want to pervade this evening, is that it can absolutely happen that way.
yeah, and I thank you for that. It's interesting because what it brings up for me is that, you know, with addiction throughout my family and particularly my stepfather, you know, and taking him to 12-step meetings and nursing him and looking after him and doing all of those lovely codependent things that we do. You know, it wasn't until really about 3 or 4 years later that I even realized that I had a problem. You know, so he became the catalyst for me, busy trying to get him into treatment and into rehabs and onto planes and off to AA meetings, you know. So he's no longer with us, sadly. But I mean, yeah, I thank him getting treatment in a way and seeing his alcoholism, which was absolutely tragic. I mean, tragic, was one of the big eye openers for me. So somehow the family interlinks of actually seeing it in your face as your sons, for you, Liz, have a bit of a wake up moment of, we've either got to face this and deal with it, or it's going to bring us down or continue. So for anybody listening that's either in addiction or they've got it in their family or something similar, they can relate to us. Where would we say to them, each of us, to start? How do we help? How do we, you know, first of all, maybe let's start with, can we do the codependent bit first? How do we help, rather than ourselves, how do we help a family member first?
Ooh, I would say,
Liz, go on, you go.
yeah, no, sorry, go if you want, Victoria, if you want to start. Sorry, just when you said that, is that okay? Just when you said that, how do we help the family member? My immediate response to that is, start with me. Has to begin with me. That's the first thing that comes up for me, because yeah, it is family members. This is my own personal experience. My great obsession was to try and help my sons, prevent them from going through what I'd gone through, to try and make them see the mistakes that I had made and trying to learn from it. And this was before I then found recovery from codependence, or that, dare I say, I'm bringing the 12-step thing, Al-Anon. You know, that pushed me towards Al-Anon. It also pushed me, funnily enough, even although I was in recovery, but I wasn't in recovery from that aspect. And I ended up taking myself off to the Meadows in Arizona to do some work.
Liz, for those people listening that don't know potentially what the Meadows is, or Al-Anon, or Coda, or could you explain a little bit about what those mean?
Yes, sorry.
No, don't worry.
Al-Anon is a 12-step group for family members or loved ones who have whose family member or loved one has a problem with drinking, or is an alcoholic, or And it's a support group and it's free, where you can meet other like-minded family members who are struggling with someone else's problematic drinking or alcoholism. And it's, yeah, personally, I found it was an amazing lifeline. Codependency for me was me trying to go to any lengths to try and fix it, control it, cure it, all of that stuff. Trying to get someone else well, stop them from dying, essentially. That's really what I was trying to do. And it actually, the way it was playing out for me was that my whole life basically came to a grounding halt, because my absolute, sort of, how would you say, my primary focus was on saving my sons. That's what it essentially had become. And I was becoming more and more unwell. So I was becoming really, as unwell as they were, really, because it was almost like they'd become my obsession, my addiction in a way. So that's what codependency is in that, from that respect. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, that massively helps. Thank you so much. Victoria, what are your thoughts on where to go for help? We might have some family members sat listening here going, well, what do you mean I've got to look at myself? What do you mean I can't help or control or do anything about my brother, uncle, son, daughter? It's hard to get your head round, isn't it? So I don't know how would you work with it, Victoria?
Well, most of the people that contact me say, right, can you help my loved one? And they need to go to rehab. They're not getting any help. And I'm like, okay, so what have you tried before? Okay, we've tried this, and this. All right. But the point is, it's just reflecting on what Liz has said, really. You can't change somebody else. You can only make those changes yourself. So come to me and I meet the person that's using substances. I work with the affected family member. Most of the people that come to me are either mums. Sorry, my internet connection's just gone for some. With sons, interestingly, that's my usual client base, and women with partners.
Right.
So that's my main client base. So what I've got to convince them to do in my friendly chat, as I call it, because we have an initial conversation, is just think about, themselves and what they can change. Because actually the models that I trained in back in the day, which were the 5-step method and craft, community reinforcement and family training, they the two different models really. But what craft does, that type of model, is teach families strategies and skills that they can implement, and as a practitioner I teach those skills, they go and implement them and I hold their hand through that. I also use another model called the concerned other, and what we go through in that is making those changes yourself so that you can reduce your own stress, so that you can live a better life, and so that you have the best chance possible of getting your loved one into treatment, and you work on yourself and make those changes. And I had a client recently, and she doesn't mind me referring to her, but she came to me because of her child's substance use, and it was an adult child, and her husband had basically been, they'd not left the house for 8 years.
Wow.
They were tag teaming with him. He'd been in and out of, psychiatric institutions, and it was driven by fear. And that fear was really holding them hostage. And the fear was that he was going to die. And when we unpicked that fear and kind of said, okay, what you're doing now isn't going to make a difference to that. But what you can do is treat your loved one with kindness, love, compassion and care, which Melanie said before, and set healthy boundaries. reduce that enabling behaviour, which is making it easier for your loved one to continue using their substance use. Withdraw when they're really intoxicated, make sure they're safe and okay, and use really positive communication strategies. So don't get entrenched in discussions when they're highly intoxicated. You've got to set the boundaries, because a lot of my clients are getting calls all night. That's affecting their sleep. My clients work, and it's about, okay, what feels safe to stop for you? Because not everybody's the same. So I had, a family contacting me, and they were like, we've got drug dealers at the door threatening to break my son's legs if we don't pay debts. So for them, it was like, I'm not going to stop doing that, because that doesn't feel safe for me to stop. That's going to make me more worried. And then the next person will say, you can't use substances in the house anymore. And the next person will be like, you can drink in the house, but you've got to be in the spare room. So I work with my clients to kind of figure out what feels safe for them to set around their boundaries, so that they can live their lives. Because they're losing, it's affecting their physical health, their mental health, their sense of purpose. Everyone here has said, like, your purpose becomes your loved one, and you lose yourself in it. And I've got some absolutely phenomenal clients that I've worked with, and one of them messaged me the other day and said, oh, look what I'm doing, I've won this award. I didn't realise at the start of the year that I've been living my life again. And that's because of the work she did. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, really. Kind of mix that up with some of the impacts there. Pathways to recovery, sorry, aren't there? It's not just mine, it's not just Al-Anon. There's Smart Recovery Friends and Family. There are Facebook groups like specifically around family addiction with thousands of people in. Whatever you need. Some people just want somebody else that's going through it to listen to a post, read a post that they've read on Facebook. Some people will want therapy. Some people will want someone like me guiding them through, like, these strategies that they can implement to change their lives. Some people won't want any of that. Some people want to go and sit in a group with other people, so there's so many different pathways. But just echoing what you've already said, Lou, don't be on your own with it. You don't need to. There are so many people affected by it, and I'm sure that any of us would say, if anybody is stuck and they want pointing in the right direction, just drop us a message or something and we'll help. Because I've, like I say, I don't see the people using substances, but I know I get messages every week saying they've stopped using the substances, they've accepted help, they've gone into rehab, they've done this, and so it's fantastic.
And I think, one of the things that I see that families really struggle with is, it as difficult as it is to go into a 12-step meeting or a mutual support group or a rehab as an addict and say, I'm struggling here. I think it can be even more difficult for a family member, especially a parent, to admit that they have a child that is using substances or drinking, because I think the thought process is, what are they going to think of me as a parent if I go and do this? So, I'm really interested to hear from you guys, what you would say to somebody that is struggling with that, at the moment, that wants to get help, but it has this idea that, people are going to judge and stigmatize and put the blame onto them for the fact that they have children or parents or whoever it is that are the people that are struggling with substance misuse.
Who wants to come in first? Me, shall I?
You go first, Liz.
Go on, Liz.
I think just exactly what you described there, Mel, is exactly what I experienced personally, and especially given the fact that I was also in recovery and I was a therapist. It was almost like a triple whammy in a way.
Yeah, I bet.
Therapist and in recovery, it was like, what? And you know, and it's fair to say, I know I said it needed to start with me, and I said 12-step recovery, of course, and I loved what Victoria was saying as well about naming all of those different routes that you can get help. Of course, you know, therapy is essential for me, and still is. You know, groups, all sorts of different things, but that you're not alone. But I think the one thing that I know I work when I work with clients is just bring them back to how they feel. You know, the reality is everything that a parent has done up until that point, they've done it with the best of intentions. It's very, very rare that somebody set out to do anything other than be helpful because they care and love for them. And ultimately, it's very, very common that really the biggest fear, which Victoria touched on and what I experienced myself, is you just don't want that loved one to die. So you'll do anything. It's just a natural instinct is to try and save, isn't it, and help. And it's very, very slowly, as Victoria was saying, it was about being able to start just open up to how it is for them, what it's like, what their life is like, and you know, and identifying things that they're maybe doing that, you know, causes upset or causes them harm or causes them discomfort. And it's, I think, especially with family members, very conscious of being really, really compassionate, being really loving, and just, you know, because it is, as I said, it's, you know, it's very usual that they will just feel so ashamed that their child has, you know, or especially their child has grown up like that. But as I said, it's just about being able to let them see what the truth is, and then let them get in touch with that abject. I mean, it's usually really painful.
Yeah.
For them.
One of the things I think my mum asked herself a lot was, you know, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? How could I have stopped this from happening? And, you know, the truth is that if you have somebody that has trauma, that is traumatized, they are going to find their ways of coping and managing that trauma. And there is, you know, nothing that you could do as a parent to stop that coping mechanism becoming addiction. You know, it could have been a myriad of other things. And I think that is, you know, one of the things that I have hope that the message that I've given to my mum and to the families that I work with is this was the way that they needed to survive, actually. And maybe it wasn't such a bad thing, because maybe they wouldn't be here if they hadn't done that.
Fair point. I hear you on that too. And I also think that, you know, blame and all the rest of it for anybody or any party in it is really not useful, is it? It's just about what responsibility do I need to take for this and what can we do now? I did want to ask something too. I just wanted to ask about 20 years ago, or in the old days, there was that couple of words bandied about, and one of them was tough love. And I just wondered where we are on this tough love idea of, you know, detaching and not engaging with a family member with addiction, and essentially cutting them out. I think that's what tough love was, or putting in such strong boundaries. I don't know, what's your sense of that? It was an old way of looking at things, I think.
I think that some of the language, you know, like hitting rock bottom and tough love and all of that, taken out of context, you know, can be pretty risky. And I see it, I'm on a lot of forums and I see what families are saying and things like that. And it's like, oh, you got to do tough love. You got to cut them out. You got to do this. And I do a bit of work with a man called George Charlton, and he is a craft trainer. And he says your love has power. And I think when we use language like tough love, it gets misinterpreted. It's like, oh, well, we've got to be tough then. We've got to throw them out. We've got to do this. But it's like I said before, you know what you feel comfortable with and what you can live with as a consequence to any action you take. So if you're going on a forum and everyone's saying throw them out, don't let them in your house, and actually then something does happen and you didn't feel comfortable with that decision at the time, it's just not going to feel good. But if you can set a boundary, like, you know, okay, it's not working, you're living here, let's support you to move somewhere else, because then we can support you externally, we'll see you once a week, we will buy you food, whatever it is that family can do, then that's a far better approach. And, you know, and the other one is hitting rock bottom. And I know that, you know, there may be people here that use that language because of your own experiences. But the amount of families that have come to me and said, well, they've got to hit rock bottom. And it's like, no, it doesn't. You don't have to not do anything until your loved one's like on the streets or whatever, because there's other approaches that you can take to support your loved one, to try and like be with them, and show them that love and care and compassion, but show it to yourself as well, because there's self-preservation here, isn't there? You know, it's so exhausting. Like, people come to me and they are so emotionally exhausted that every reaction they have is an emotional one, and there's no, like, you know, we're not using the part of our brain that is helping us strategize things or think clearly. You know, we're using the emotional part of our brain, aren't we, all the time when we're stressed? So you gotta give yourself some time to, you know, build your own resilience up, give yourself some space so that you can handle the situation a little bit better. And so, Lou, no, tough love.
Yeah,
it is
it's
not
a no.
It's a no.
Okay, we'll leave that one then. That was 2 decades ago. There is something though about safeguarding risks that you mentioned, Victoria, about why whole family recovery might not be recommended.
Yeah, so I'll just bring a little bit of my own personal lived experience in here, because I was in a relationship in my 20s with somebody that wasn't, I wouldn't describe them as an addict, but they were very physically violent when they drank. And at the time, I thought that was a reason. I know now I'm doing a lot of training and working with a lot of people that have experienced domestic abuse. It was going on anyway, but the alcohol was an excuse to be violent. Yeah, because he wasn't going out and being violent to his friends in the pub. It was strategic. It was towards me. So he wasn't out of control. So, but, you know, a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, but sometimes I'll get clients coming to me, you know, who are, I uncover that they are actually living in an abusive relationship. So the priority for me there is actually, you know, I've got to say to you that me working with you to support your loved one into you and your loved one into recovery is not a priority. It's not safe. You know, I can't go and say to somebody, go and set healthy boundaries to somebody that's abusive, because that's going to increase a risk. Yeah. So in that case, that is a safeguarding risk. And the other thing that I've got to mention, because I am a safeguarding trainer and consultant as well, is children. So if there are children in the household, us as practitioners, we need to be really mindful that there may be, well, there will be an impact on them. There's always an impact. There was a great study a few years ago called Like Sugar for Adults, and that was about the impact of non-dependent drinking on children. And it's well worth a read. It's where all the mums and dads that drink that go, oh my gosh, when I mention it in training, you know. But seeing a parent intoxicated impacts on children.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that when parents use substances that they're a bad parent. It doesn't mean that every parent that uses a substance, you put a referral into children's services. But what it means is, you know, parents, families need to put the needs of that child first. A child's needs are paramount, and if they are under any risk, then my priority is that child. It isn't the person that's using substances. And then I've lost clients, you know, I'm private now like you. People don't want to be referred into children's services, and I've got to say to anyone listening, it doesn't happen very often. You know, don't think, oh my god, I can't go and get help because I'm going to get children's services involved. It really is few and far between. But as a professional that's done this work for a long time and worked directly with children, I would just say, you know, we've got to be cautious about that as well. So yeah, that was it really, Lou.
Okay, amazing. Last question to us all, because we're coming up to the hour, but what does recovery look like for the family? What is a recovered family? Mel, do you want to go first on this?
Sorry, I was just reading some of the comments, which we'll come to in a minute. I think what a recovered family looks like is a family that communicates, a family that has boundaries, a family that can come together with love and compassion, without blame, without shame, and that can rebuild the relationships that have been severed or damaged as a result, without pointing fingers, and where everybody is on their own journey of recovery.
Lovely.
They're doing it for themselves.
Yeah. Great. Love it. Liz?
Yeah, I just reiterate everything that that Mel said there. Was just that it's interesting that word tough love was, the words tough love was still resonating there, and it was actually I like to look at it as more of compassionate boundaries.
Yeah.
As Victoria was saying, setting boundaries where you're at. You know, the ultimate may be that maybe somebody needs to leave the home, but that's not necessarily where you need to go to immediately. So it's just that sort of, you know, little step by step. But yeah, absolutely, where there's communication, where there's an openness, dialogue, non-judgmental, where people are beginning to feel comfortable in their own skin. There's no more walking around in eggshells anymore.
Yeah.
You know, sort of trying to work out, can I say this? Shall I do that? What about this? What about that? You know, freedom, really. Freedom from worry and that. Yeah, just that's what a recovered family is. But also, I think as well, a recovered family can be, or a recovered person can be, where, of course, they have understandable, you know, concern, whatever else, for somebody that may still be have unhealthy behaviours, but at the same time still be able to live their own life. In a, you know, in a productive way.
Fabulous. Thank you. Victoria, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just to kind of build on, well, not build on really, just to reflect back on what Melanie and Liz have said. I think it is all about that communication. I think that is the absolute key. When families can communicate with that real strong emotion and anger, and you know, when they're able to calmly tell somebody how they feel and somebody respond to that. And it doesn't always mean abstinence, Liz, does it? I think you were just touching on that. It's like, you know, this week I've spoken to a couple of people who are on you know, prescribed methadone, and we sometimes want to push them further, but I said, what's it like being a methadone? They're like, it has changed my life. From what I was before to what I was now, it's completely changed my life, and that impacts so wonderfully on the family, because, you know, one said my mum's got me back now. So beautiful. That's it, isn't it? It's just
yeah.
That's it. There's lots of different paths.
Yeah. There always are. And Mel, have we got some questions or comments?
There aren't any questions. There's a little bit of kind of debate going on when we started talking about tough love, and boundary setting and detaching. And one of the things that I think is just really important to reiterate here is very much what Victoria was saying. This is about meeting people where they are at. And this is about what is okay for you, because I know for my mum, she got to the point where my addiction was making her so unwell that in order for her to get a little bit of recovery so that she could support me, she couldn't have me around because I was perpetuating that cycle. And it wasn't that she was using tough love. It wasn't that she was kicking me out on the street. It was that she recognized that in order to be able to support me, there had to be some detachment. And I think this is where, looking at that codependency side of it comes in. And I think it really is about saying what is okay for you, exactly what Victoria said, and what is okay for one isn't okay for the other. And I think when there are people that are advocating a one size fits all, that can become really dangerous. So I would say, just go within what is right for you, what feels okay, what boundaries feel okay for you to set. And if it's, somebody is telling you to do something and it's not sitting right with you, don't do it.
Absolutely. It's interesting actually, because that just coming back from that tough love as well, where there's been certainly in more than one occasion where I've responded and put really strict boundaries in, to the point where I've actually had some friends say to me, God, how could you do that? And it could have fallen into the category of tough love. But at the time, it was absolutely the right thing to do, and it was extreme. And I know it was in the whole sort of, if you look at a continuum, but genuinely, it felt the right thing. I know it was the right thing. And yeah. But not everyone would be comfortable with that. And as you said, and Victoria said, just depends on where you are. There's no point pushing somebody towards a boundary setting that they're not going to then. And the one thing that somebody said to me as well is, whatever the boundary is that you put in, you've got to be prepared to follow it through. Otherwise, there is no boundary. So that's, just a bit there.
So I think it's got to be consistent and clear and all of those wonderful C's and communicative and all the rest of it. Otherwise, it's not a boundary, is it?
Oh.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much for your wisdom. Lovely to ask the questions and to get your input on it all. And I just really hope it's useful for anybody either watching it later or on YouTube or tuning into the podcast. Come and join us in Trauma Thrivers Live on a Thursday night. If you're watching it after, please hit replay. And if you've got any questions or any feedback, we're coming into the group all the time anyway. So please just put them underneath. We'd love to hear from you. But in the meantime, good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And we shall see you all again, same time next week. All right, take care for now and speak soon.
Bye.
Bye.